The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Monday, September 12th, 2016. Thank you so much for joining us. There, as always, there is a lot happening in the news, a lot of ground to cover. You can join the conversation. I'll start taking calls around 8:30 and join in based on anything that we've discussed up until that point, 857-600-0518. And as always, I want to take the time to thank all of my patrons. Without you, I couldn't do it. We appreciate every contribution from $1 to, $1,000 a month. We appreciate everything that you do. You can support the show and help make the show even better by going to patreon.com /the BPD show. Okay, so let's jump in the news. And I want to start with a couple of caveats. Not that I have to give them, but I want to give them. And I'm going to give them. First and foremost, this will be the very first time. I'm almost 100% certain that this is the very first time I would have ever mentioned Hillary Clinton's health on my show. That's number one. The reason I have not mentioned Hillary's health on my show up until this point is because I don't do anything that I feel borders conspiracy theory. And until I can find some multiple sources, because not all sources are good sources all the time. A lot of sources become crappy sources when they get politically motivated. And so until I find multiple sources, generally from opposing viewpoints, covering a similar story, that's when I'm like, okay, let's dig in a little deeper, or until I see it for myself. When I see it for myself, at that point, I'm like, okay, I don't care what anybody says. It's something that I have to cover. And that's something that I have to do today. I have to cover Hillary Clinton's health. And I gave all those caveats because a lot of people don't want you to talk about Hillary Clinton's health. From one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is saying you should have been talking about Hillary Clinton's health, et cetera, whatever. I'm going to cover it when I'm ready to cover it. And obviously right now is the perfect time to cover it because even yesterday, and I'm one more caveat before I dig into this. One more caveat. Even yesterday, when I heard the Fox News report, the very first outlet to report this was Fox News. When I heard the Fox News reporter reporting on her health, the way he described it to me sounded like she broke her heel, and she fell because she broke her heel because he put so much emphasis on his words, her heel being underneath the van and them having to recover her heel. This is how Fox News reported it. This was first thing yesterday morning, right? And when I heard that, I'm like, okay, this really could be she broke her heel. So even to the very end, I was skeptical until I saw the video. And I'm going to share the video with you today because if you see the video and you look closely, there was absolutely something wrong with Hillary Clinton. Let's take a look at it. You can see her blonde hair closer to the van, right behind the gentleman opening the van doors. And she's leaning up against a post, and now she's shaking, quivering, and about four people. She has essentially, yeah.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only...
Yeah. Okay, that caught me again. Okay, but you watch the video, and to break it down, not that it needs breaking down, but she's leaning up against a post. And even leaning up against the post, someone is strong-arming her to support her to keep her from falling off the post. The Secret Service van pulls up, and Hillary attempts to make a move on her own, and she loses all of she can't walk, and she stumbles and almost becomes completely limp. Her body prostrates over, and they essentially have to throw her in the van to get her where she needed to go. About 5 or 6 people got involved at that point. Okay. So my first reaction when I saw this video was, damn it, they've given this election to Donald Trump. That's my initial reaction. And I'm sorry if I'm an ass and my initial reaction was not concerned for Hillary Clinton. I confess, my initial concern was not for Hillary Clinton's health. It was political. Damn it, they've nominated somebody who is too sick to run for office, and now they've handed this election over to Hillary Clinton. Now, all the well wishes in the world to Hillary Clinton. She needs to take care of herself. This is, you only have one life to live, and so you take care of yourself and your body, and don't overwork yourself. All right. All that being said, I was extremely upset because I felt as though the campaign and the Democratic Party had been hiding a sickness from us that, if exposed on this level, would put Donald Trump in the White House. And I'm sorry, one last thing I'm going to say. I would rather fight a protracted battle against Hillary Clinton's neoliberal economic policies and neoconservative hawkish foreign policy over the next 4 years than to fight Donald Trump's neoliberal economic policy, neoconservative foreign policy, and penchant for white supremacy nationalism, white nationalism. I would. If I had to pick, because this is where, if you fancy yourself to be a progressive, you're in a position where you essentially are picking your opponent, picking your opposition, right? And I would much rather fight against Hillary Clinton's move towards the right than Donald Trump's move towards the extreme right. And we can argue about that all day. So my gut reaction was, damn it, they have given this election to Donald Trump. And matter of fact, this is what a lot of people were saying in a lot of media outlet circles that I run in. They were concerned that if this got out, which it was inevitably going to get out, that this is going to help Donald Trump win. All right, so that was my initial reaction. My next thought was, what in the world is going on with her health? And wow. I mean, this is something that has been hidden from us. And this is something that this is going to be fodder for the right. They are going to run this in the ground. And Donald Trump didn't really run it into the ground on yesterday because it was 9/11. It would have been extremely inappropriate. But today he did not run it in the ground because he realizes if he stays out of the way, the questions about Hillary Clinton's health can persist without the story turning to be about how much of a jackass Donald Trump is. So Donald Trump got smart because he wants this to have the biggest impact it possibly can. And in this case, the best scenario and path for him is to wish her well and to shut up. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did today. All right, so those are some of my reactions. Now, later on, and to be fair to Clinton's campaign, this is Clinton about an hour and a half later coming out of, I believe they mentioned that this was Chelsea's home in New York.
Secretary Clinton, how are you feeling?
How are you feeling?
Hi.
Great. What happened?
It's a beautiful day in New York.
And she's saying it's a beautiful day. Here comes a kid, obviously screened by the Secret Service. And I'm actually listening for something.
Hi.
Secretary, how are you feeling?
Great. Feeling great.
What happened? What happened?
Listening closely. Oh yeah, you can hear it. Okay, you can hear it. What I was listening for was at the very end, you can hear jackass of the millennium, Martin Shkreli, the farmer bro who raised the prices of medication that was necessary for treatment of AIDS. He raised it by like 2,000%, something ridiculous. In the background, you can hear him yelling and trolling Hillary Clinton, yelling Trump, Trump, Trump. That's a whole different story, and not even a substantive story, but somebody said that you could hear it in the video, and I wanted to listen myself. So at the very end, if you rewind it, you could hear him saying Trump, Trump, Trump. What's important is, though, you see Hillary Clinton coming out looking like a brand new person, waving her hands, blah, 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 blah. She looks, she says she feels great, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So her doctors came out later on that day and stated that Hillary has, and this is, again, because I've seen so many different reactions about this, because people are like, the first thing somebody accused me of was, joining in the witch hunt. And I'm like, you really haven't been watching my show, because if you had, that I have never talked about Hillary Clinton's health expressly because I don't believe it until I see it. I'm skeptical of everything, right? And then another group of people are like, well, it's no big deal. People work with, what her doctor says she had. The doctors came out later and said that she had pneumonia. And so, she had been diagnosed with pneumonia. She's been having these, and quite honestly, they are ridiculous coughing fits. Like, I mean, they have something I've never seen before. But uncontrollable coughing fits, diagnosed with pneumonia on Friday, and yesterday, they finally admitted that she had been diagnosed with pneumonia. Now, whether you want to believe she has pneumonia or not, that's totally up to you. I will say this much. When I needed a note from my doctor, it was never hard to get, right? Even if, whatever, not my current doctor, back in the day, Dr. So-and-so. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about doctors before you. But when I needed a note from my doctor, I could get the doctor to, But anyway, but if you don't want to believe it's a pneumonia, what is it? You can go into the speculations. What I will say is that they have made something that was potentially benign tremendously suspect by not disclosing it. And for you who believe that this is something that should not be disclosed, here is the exact reason why it should have been disclosed. Because had it been disclosed on Friday, then her passing out on yesterday, would have made instant sense. No one would have questioned. No one would have said, oh my God, Hillary has X, Y, and Z. And that has been the problem with Hillary Clinton's campaign the entire time. People are demanding that she has a level of privacy that has become a liability to her campaign. Not only a liability in the sense that it's undermining her campaign, but it's a liability in the sense that it is making everyone, and I guess this is another form of undermining, but it makes it difficult for people to trust even what they say now, right? Like, if they had said on Friday she had pneumonia, then on Sunday we would have been like, damn, she passed out. She should not be out there with pneumonia. But because they want this level of secrecy, not only do we question whether or not it's pneumonia, but it allows people to question everything they say. Because if it was something, and I've raise your hand in the audience if you've had pneumonia. Raise your hand in the audience if you work through pneumonia. And I'm not saying that pneumonia isn't serious, because people die from pneumonia, but pneumonia is not rare. And people work and walk with pneumonia, walking pneumonia. Again, people have it and they work. So it's not as though it was something that ever needed to be hidden. And that's the problem. If you lie and deceive us on simple things, how can you, and yes, at this point in the bigger scheme of things, the fact that she got diagnosed with pneumonia is not surprising, nor is it a big deal. What's surprising and a big deal is that you withheld that information to your own detriment. And because it's par for the course for all of the other suspicions that people have about the Clinton campaign in the first place, about the Clintons in general. and about all of the media heads that surround her and demand that she be allowed this level of privacy, as though she is not allowed to be questioned by the public, even though she is clearly a beneficiary of what the public has given her. So my problem is not, I'll go with it. She has pneumonia. Fine, let's go with that. Again, until I have something solid to actually challenge that, I'm going to go with it. Fine. The problem, again, must be reiterated that once you have gotten to a level where you can't be truthful and forthcoming, more than anything else, just tell the public, because yes, the public has the right to know the health and well-being of a person that they are getting ready to entrust the entire nation to for the next 4 years. And that's one of the biggest things that bothers me, is that all of a sudden we are demanding a level of secrecy of someone who is going to have the biggest impact in our lives over the next 4 years. I mean, we screen people for part-time work a little bit harder than that. I mean, hopefully you screen relationships a little bit harder than, I mean, just temporary. I'm not talking about marriage. I'm talking about just temporary dates. Like, just, but I know some of us live kind of wild on the wild side. We don't screen, everybody. But this is somebody who's going to have a major impact on our lives for the next 4 years. And you're acting as though we don't have the right to ask, how healthy is this person? No. Not only do we have the right to ask, it's our duty to know the mental and physical well-being of a person who's going to manage our nation for the next 4 years, potentially 8 years. And then later on, I'm going to do a segment called Hypocrisy Now, because not only is that something that's reasonable, that's something that Democrats were asking back in 2008 and in 2012. And for the life of me, I just don't understand, and I don't want to kick over my bucket, right? I don't want to steal my own thunder, but I don't understand how you could look yourself in the face, in the mirror, and say today something is wrong that you demanded 4 years ago, 8 years ago. If 8 years ago it made sense to ask about the health of a presidential candidate, then today you should not in any form or fashion be demanding that we not ask about Hillary Clinton's health. And that's all I'm going to say about Hillary and her health. They should have been forthcoming. And by not being forthcoming, it makes us question everything they tell us about her health. 857-600-0518. If you want to talk about Hillary's health, we can, within acceptable bounds, we'll talk about it. All right. In other news, so Donald Trump has a problem. I think that's an understatement. Donald Trump has a lot of problems, but one of the problems that Donald Trump has is his foundation, the Donald Trump Foundation, and we'll get into trust me, we're going to get into the nuances and the differences and the arguments. But Trump has, let me pull up something here. Trump has a potential. Trump is facing a potential federal investigation about his contribution to Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi's campaign in the sum total of $25,000. He has two problems with that contribution. One, the contribution was made from his foundation and not from him personally. The foundation is, of course, a nonprofit. Being a nonprofit, you cannot contribute to a foundation. And Trump has since reimbursed the foundation the $25,000 and paid a $2,500 fine to the IRS as a penalty for making a contribution from a nonprofit to a political campaign. So the first wave of his problems has been taken care of, right? So the IRS portion has been resolved, it's been paid, and he's been fined, and it's over. The second part of what he's facing is based on the appearance of quid pro quo, that in the middle of Donald Trump's, in the middle of the Florida Attorney General's investigation of Trump University, she suddenly dropped the investigation into Trump University shortly after receiving this contribution. The reports, I believe, from three major papers, the Miami Herald, the Orlando Sentinel, and the Tampa Bay Times, all indicate that Bondi went and sought this contribution from Donald Trump. Donald Trump acquiesced, gave her a contribution, and shortly after that, her office stopped looking into the fraud charges, the allegations of fraud. In terms of Trump University, there are people who paid, I believe the highest I saw was about $47,000. Somebody paid $8,000. There's a couple of hundred Florida citizens who have been who felt as though they have been taken advantage by Trump University. They all appealed to the state Attorney General, and the Attorney General, a Republican, Pam Bondi, opened an investigation. And then shortly after receiving this $25,000 contribution, the investigation ended. This gives a very apparent look of quid pro quo, of bribery, of political bribery. And there have been multiple requests of the Justice Department to investigate this and to press criminal charges against Pam Bondi and Donald Trump. This is not a little thing. This is actually a really big thing that Trump is going to have to face over the next 57 days that are left. This will potentially lead to a full-blown investigation into Trump, his relationship with Pam Bondi, Pam Bondi's investigation of Trump University, which ultimately is going to lead to more of an investigation into Trump University. In addition to all of the lawsuits, there's a class action lawsuit outside of from New York that is pending relating to Trump University. So this is not an October surprise, because we're not in October yet, and not an October surprise because this is something that has been investigated for a long time. However, it is just now getting to the point of a federal investigation because, as the Orlando Sentinel put it, the Florida authorities have no desire whatsoever to investigate this. In fact, it would be the Attorney General's office who would investigate something like this. And seeing as this implicates the Attorney General, there's no way she's going to investigate herself and find herself guilty. So, and I believe this was from the Miami Herald that stated that at this point, it's something that the people of Florida have to appeal to the federal government to get some type of remedy to this fraud. Now, here's a layer of complication. This falls into the category of whether or not you can prove quid pro quo. And it falls into the category of the decision that was just made by the Supreme Court in McDonnell versus the Supreme Court. Former Governor Bob McDonnell, who was convicted of political corruption and bribery. And that ruling, that conviction, was overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court because they felt as though the standard for this conviction was not met because they were not able to prove quid pro quo. And because if now there are some differences, but this will be brought up, guaranteed. This is going to be brought up in this investigation of Donald Trump. In the case of McDonald, they felt that if they kept this conviction, then it would have ramifications that spill over into the normal activities of politicians, scheduling meetings, and whether or not scheduling a meeting with someone constitutes a political favor. And does that political favor mean does that meeting mean that the meeting would not have happened if not for that contribution? So the McDonald case is in a way it's complicated, but you can read that separately. But in the case of Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, it's going to apply. Now, in the case of Hillary Clinton's foundation and the State Department, it's also going to be applicable. In the case of Hillary Clinton and the State Department and the Clinton Foundation, everyone has put this standard up saying, well, this is something that we should not even be talking about because you can't prove quid pro quo. You cannot prove that Hillary Clinton exchanged these favors because of the money. They're going to run. Now, in the case of Donald Trump, it seems so much more apparent because of, one, how Pam Bondi solicited the donation herself, and then two, the investigation that was ongoing suddenly stopped. So it may very well be that they can prove, or they have enough to assert that this was quid pro quo, essentially a political bribe. They may have enough. And this is why it's a big deal, because now Donald Trump, he's on his way to a potential investigation. And from some insights, well, I don't want to say inside sources, but from people who are connected, they are actually now going to shift this from being a conversation about pay for play to being a conversation of just straight bribery. So, putting Donald Trump aside, the question is this standard of whether or not we should even talk about it because we can't prove quid pro quo is another example of something we will apply to people we like, but will not apply to someone we don't like. Because essentially you can never, unless they hand you an envelope that says bribe, and on it says so that you can stop my investigating me. Pretty much like the case with Li Fong from The Intercept. They were doing an investigation of a Chinese corporation that had money pouring into the U.S. election, right? In that case, the man literally passed an envelope with $200,000 in it so that they could be friends and so that this story could go away. Unless we have, and this is almost the standard the Supreme Court is requiring now with the case with McDonald versus the United States. Without that type of just outright blatant bribery, it's impossible. It's impossible to prove. And as people apply that to Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, you also have to apply that to Donald Trump and the Trump Foundation. Because they're not apples to apples, granted. I would give you that, because there's enough in the Donald Trump case that it may warrant a federal investigation just standing on its own, right? But whether or not you can discuss it in the media, or whether or not you should discuss it in the media, or whether or not there's enough evidence to actually prove, no, there's not enough evidence to actually prove that this was a bribe. They're going to have to conclude that this was a bribe. But it's just another example. This is where we have come, and I don't know if this is where we've come, but this is where we've been. We've been here for a while, where we will apply something to someone else, and we will not apply it to our own standards. We will give ourselves the way out and not afford that way out to someone else. Because if we're going to discuss now, if we're discussing, and it's like what, the chicken or the egg. Now, are we discussing the Trump Foundation because people scratched the surface of the Clinton Foundation too much, and then everybody was like, well, let's have a look at Donald Trump, and then they found all of this festering in Donald Trump's foundation? The bottom line is, there's a problem with how we allow money in our campaigns across the nation. And there's a problem when people have foundations that can accept these obscene amounts of dollars, and then we shouldn't have no hint or any suspicion in our mind that they could possibly be granting a favor because we can't prove it. I mean, who else is given that much benefit of the doubt in their life? I mean, seriously, think about it. Who else has been given that much benefit of the doubt? You know, on your job, you would never be given that level, that much benefit of the doubt. In your relationship, you will never be given that level of benefit of the doubt. But we grant and afford politicians that much leeway, which clearly has been abused. I mean, I guess it was like that Louisiana politician, his dumbass put $90,000 in a freezer, right? And you know, just $90,000 and didn't even really, you know, I guess we're waiting on people to make big mistakes like that, clear and obvious mistakes like that, before we say, oh, hey, that was a bribe. Meanwhile, we have Donald Trump giving Pam Bondi $25,000, and all of a sudden his investigation goes away. But because of how it was done, and because it was done as a campaign contribution, then it's very questionable whether or not we can assert quid pro quo or a bribe. Same with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton receives, the Clinton Foundation receives millions upon millions of dollars, right? And then all of a sudden there are meetings, there are emails, there are favors. I mean, you had Raj Fernando, a guy with zero international nuclear proliferation skills, landing on a top secret, top level clearance nuclear committee. And all he did was give contributions to the Clinton Foundation. And we're all supposed to simply say, because we did not or cannot prove that this was a direct bribe, that this is something we shouldn't talk about. No.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Grossly
That's not how it works. All right, 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. What do you think? What do you think about Trump's potential quid pro quo as compared to Hillary Clinton's quid pro quo? You know, Trump's came in a form of him giving money to a candidate. Clinton's came in the form of someone giving a potential alleged quid pro quo, right? So, you know, people giving to the Clinton Foundation, and then all of a sudden they have access. I mean, the entire thing is broken. The entire thing needs to be changed. And the amount of money that's allowed inside of our political system just gives you too much opportunity for corruption. 857-600-0518. All right, let me move on. I want to talk about a police shooting in my Florida town. Florida is Florida. That just happened over the weekend. The man who was shot and killed by Broward County Police sheriff's deputies, his name was Gregory Frazier. His picture is on your screen now. Gregory Frazier was shot while sitting in his backyard eating chicken wings, eating takeout. His sister called the police because of a domestic, she was afraid. She called the sheriff's deputy because she was afraid for her daughter. Frazier got into an altercation with his niece, and because his sister was afraid, she called the Broward sheriff's deputy. The deputies approached him and told him 3 times to get on the ground. Frazier allegedly said, "Leave me alone." Each time they said, "Leave me alone." And then one of the sheriff's deputies pulled the trigger, and then a second deputy pulled the trigger and killed him. They handcuffed him, and once they realized he was unconscious, they uncuffed him and performed CPR. He later died. Frazier was 56 years old. This took place in Pompano Beach, which is right around the matter of fact, I probably know where he got the chicken wings from. More than likely it's from Omar's on the corner there. But this is a very, so allegedly he had a knife, and the knife that he had was a kitchen knife. And that is now being used as the justification for the shooting. It's difficult for this to fly, the sniff test, because many people eat food with knives. And because he was sitting down, he was apparently, if I'm not mistaken, shot in the back of the head and killed on the scene. So there have been some rallies and protests in Pompano Beach, Florida. These videos that you can see online on YouTube and Twitter, Facebook and Twitter rather, of people in the community gathering together, chanting Black Lives Matter. And of course, this is following the same exact pattern we see with everything else. The lines are drawn, conclusions have already been made. And because Frazier had a kitchen knife eating chicken, all of a sudden that was a threat to the police officers. Now, I don't have all the details other than what I've given you at this point. So it maybe there's going to be a video that comes out that shows Gregory Frazier lunging at the police from behind with the kitchen knife. But suffice it to say, this is just a continuation and an extension of this fear, this two things, this fear with which police officers approach black people. And then the second thing is the willingness to use a level of force that is in many occasions not necessary. Because, I mean, unless Mr. Frazier just turned into, and this is literally what people see and assume, right? Because they have to find a way to justify this. And this is what pisses me off the most, is that in order for them to justify every incident that happens with a black person and a police officer, they automatically assume that someone like Frazier turns into this monster who is so terrifying and such a threat to these heroic and loving police officers that they had no choice but to shoot him because Frazier had a knife. Never mind he was sitting there eating chicken. Frazier had a knife. And because he had a knife, all of a sudden they paint a picture in their mind of this hulking barbarian that had to be put down by the heroic police officers. And they believe this time after time and incident after incident, no matter what a person was holding or whether or not they were holding anything at all. They make the assumption that this black man or this black woman posed an imminent threat that required deadly force. So it's never ask these people online, ask these people who are in your neighborhood, who are on your jobs. It's never a case that they would ever believe that the police officer was wrong. They always will make the black person, the person who is dead, they will make them out to be some type of King Kong, Godzilla, behemoth of a beast, because in their minds, that's the only way they could justify it. And it becomes this feedback loop, right? Now they believe this. And so now police officers approach a scene with this type of bias in their mind already, with this unjustified fear of blackness. And they resort to a level of force that is completely unnecessary. In many, many cases, not in all cases, but in far too many cases, they have rushed into the scene and instantly they see a young person as much older than what they are because they're black. There's social sciences that bears that out. There's an automatic assumption of a level of maturity or of being older once you're black than if you were white. That's how they saw 12-year-old Tamir Rice, and they called it in as though he was 19. So they automatically see you as older. They automatically see you as more threatening. And then they automatically make this conclusion that you are a threat to their safety. And they pull their gun and they shoot you and kill you. But we have no reason to protest. We have no reason. We have no reason whatsoever to protest. We have no reason to complain. We have no reason to sit down on the Star Spangled Banner and sit down on the Pledge of Allegiance, because if there's anything wrong in America, the only thing wrong in America is with people who complain about America. And there's anything wrong in the black community, it's 100% the black community, never the structural problems that have been baked into the system against the black community. It's always the black person's fault. He didn't work hard enough. She didn't have enough morals. Her morality was questionable, or she was too loud and she shouldn't have talked back, or he shouldn't have had a toy gun. She shouldn't have asserted her humanity. He should not have had been walking around. He should have complied. There's always something more that a black person has to do to not warrant their own execution. Never will it be the case that we should look at the structural problems. Never, ever. I mean, ever. There is not a single case that some of these people can look at and say that it was the cops' wrongdoing. Not even with Walter Scott, I believe North Carolina or South Carolina. Walter Scott getting shot in the back. You have people who try to justify that and say, well, he shouldn't have run. And because he ran, then he was justified for getting shot. The cop was justified shooting him. There are people who make this argument, and not just random run-of-the-mill, token, ignorant, troll people. There are people in positions of power who will bend over and contort themselves in ungodly positions so that they can justify the actions of every single police officer against black people. So I'll be speaking later on this week. I'll be reaching out to some colleagues I have in Pompano Beach, and I'll have them on the show so we can talk a little bit more about the protests that are going on down there. And we'll bring you an update of what's happening with the shooting death of Gregory Frazier. In other news, Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! Has had an arrest warrant issued for her because of her coverage in the North Dakota pipeline. The protest that's going on right now, still going on in North Dakota. The only media outlet that showed up on the scene was Democracy Now! Democracy Now! Has essentially propelled this story into the national light, brought it to the national attention. And because of Democracy Now!'s coverage, CNN, MSNBC, all these other outlets picked it up and started covering it. And as a result, there has been an arrest warrant issued by North Dakota for Amy Goodman. She has been charged with criminal trespassing, which is a misdemeanor offense. And this is, again, a result of her team being in North Dakota last week, covering the protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And this is a quote from Democracy Now! This is actually a quote from Amy Goodman. She said, "This is an unacceptable violation of freedom of the press. I was doing my job by covering pipeline guards, unleashing dogs and pepper spray on Native American protesters. This is it's interesting, troubling, disturbing, but an interesting shift in the suppression of media. And not this political suppression that we see where people will suppress some conservative, Facebook got caught suppressing some conservative media outlets, which is bad, right? That's bad, right? And not just covering, you have conservative outlets that do their best to suppress. Now, I'm not talking about the partisan suppression that people do and try every day. I'm talking about corporations, private contractors in partnership with the state, essentially going after the media because of what the media exposed. This is next level, in my opinion, right? This case that not a lot of people are talking about. So far, I've seen minimum coverage of the charges being pressed or the warrant that has been issued against Amy Goodman. But this is the next level suppression. This is the partnership between state, local authorities, and private corporations working together to suppress the media. In other words, this is punitive to say because this organization, Democracy Now!, came and report. I mean, at what point does, and they're charging her with trespassing and coming on private property, and et cetera, et cetera. But this is something that there are, I believe, almost 4,000 people out there right now. There have been attack dogs that have been unleashed on protesters, tear gas thrown on protesters. This is something that has made its way all the way to the White House. And they have been able to keep this basically suppressed because there has been no media coverage in any significant fashion. I believe the Young Turks, they sent a reporting team out there, and then Democracy Now! And perhaps some local newspapers. But in terms of national coverage, there was none. And once Democracy Now! Got there, that exposed it on another level that it had not gotten. And now they're going to press charges. Part of me is still naive enough to believe that these charges won't go anywhere, because it's a clearly an affront to the freedom of the press. Clearly, there's no question, right? At some point, if there's breaking news, the media has the right to go and expose that news to the rest of America, right? If this warrant, if she's arrested and charged with trespassing and found guilty of trespassing, then this sets a precedent that will have ramifications for, just unbelievably far-reaching ramifications. Think about it. If the media has to get permission to go on every piece of private property, then that limits the media to covering the news from just where the public square is. The sidewalks. The street, the middle of the street. So part of me, maybe I didn't do the research to see if there's ever been a case. I guess I could look up a case now, right? Of media being charged with trespassing. Like, I don't know if there's any precedent before this. Well, 2015, there's a Washington Post reporter charged with trespassing and interfering with the police officer. Let me see. Is that in Ferguson? Yep, Ferguson, Missouri. Imagine that. I just took a while. Something said 2015, Ferguson. And I wonder if there's a correlation between the coverage that is pushing back against the state and their decision to charge charge them with trespassing. So far, I'm 2 for 2, but of course that sample size is entirely too small to make that conclusion. But nevertheless, part of me is naive enough to believe that these charges will not go anywhere. But I think we should all follow this step by step to see if it goes anywhere, because it will set a precedent that would have far-reaching ramifications if the state is able to charge someone with trespassing, a media outlet with trespassing for covering the news, when covering the news requires them to go onto private property, especially in the case of large-scale protests where there's about 4,000 people who are trespassing in protest. All right, a couple other things I want to cover. Where is Amy? David Duke. I was going to talk about David Duke. What the hell? Why not? David Duke, and particularly Hillary Clinton's statement of the basket of deplorables. This falls into I have to give multifaceted coverage on every one of these things. Here's Hillary Clinton. Let me set it up. I'll set it up with this video. Here's Hillary Clinton discussing the basket of deplorables.
Grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. But that other basket of people are people who feel the government has let them down, the economy has let them down, nobody cares about them.
Okay.
Secretary Clinton.
All right. So I don't know what's up with my system tonight. The system was supposed to switch, but anyway. So there she goes. This was last Thursday, I believe. Or Thursday or Friday, whatever. She called half of Donald Trump supporters people who belong in the basket of deplorables: racist, homophobic, xenophobic, every kind of ism that there exists, they are guilty of. Sexism, racism, fascism, every ism. So, at face value, I would concur. I don't think that's something a presidential candidate should say, though. One, because you're in the business of winning votes, not alienating votes. Okay, but there's no question. There are enough people in Donald Trump's camp that genuinely believe that black people should be separated from white people, to make that assertion that there's a large swath of Donald Trump's. I don't know the percentage, and she admitted that she was being grossly generalizing grossly. I don't know what percentage it is, but I know it's a large percentage. It is a very strong. If you go to his protests, and you might as well call them protests. If you go to his rallies, you'll hear the type of vitriol that's coming from a large segment of Donald Trump's campaign. However, this is not something a presidential candidate should say. Number two, it's something that people who complain about the language and the rhetoric of someone else should not say. Right. If we're going to talk about the way Donald Trump talks about America and the way he talks about certain groups of America, and I'm loath to use this phrase, right? But it's the easiest way to describe it. If you focus on people being politically correct, then you cannot turn around and then be politically incorrect and then get protection and coverage and justification from people who all they do all day long is complain about how politically incorrect Donald Trump is. The media, left-leaning media, propaganda outlets, basically. Right? All they do all day long is complain about how disgusting Donald Trump's language is. And granted, while this may be true about Donald Trump's half of Donald Trump's supporters, it's still politically incorrect. And for people who thrive on trying to make people understand that Donald Trump's political incorrectness is not something that we should embrace, we too should not embrace this moment of political incorrectness by Hillary Clinton. See, it's that pesky holding ourselves to the same standard that we hold someone else to that really steals the joy out of every moment. It does. It's not fun. It takes, you would love to just jump on board with this and say, yeah, David Duke, you're deplorable. Ann Coulter, you're deplorable. You just, because it's fun. It is. That's why the right does it. It's fun. It's enjoyable to just thrash your political appointment with as many ad hominems as you possibly can. But again, if you've made your living and every single day you talk about how disgusting the language is from Donald Trump, you cannot then turn around and say that this was something okay for Hillary Clinton to say. It is okay for her to say that they are sexist, they're racist, they're misogynistic, they're homophobic, and then show evidence to that fact. Perfectly okay, because it's 100% true. But to say that we should lump them and throw them all into a basket of deplorables is not something that you really want to say about. I mean, third of all, fourth of all, fifth of all, who the hell even talks like that? Who talks about a basket? People want to compare this to Mitt Romney's 47% comment. This is more akin to Mitt Romney's binders full of women comment, because who the hell talks like that? Who sits around and say, I have people in a basket of deplorables? Who thinks like that? Not the average American. I'm sorry. It's weird. It's a weird statement in many different ways. But the bigger point is that we, again, another example of holding ourselves to a different standard than we hold other people. All right. Now, this ties in with David Duke, because today vice presidential candidate Mike Pence was asked, does he believe that David Duke belongs in that basket of deplorables? And here's a picture of David Duke. David Duke, of course, the Louisiana politician, and the Louisiana, he helped found the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in, I believe it was 1974 in Louisiana. He's like a grand master, grand dragon, whatever, of the KKK. One of these days, apparently I'm going to have to learn more about the KKK power structure so that I can actually identify them correctly, because we're having to talk about them so much because of their affinity for Donald Trump. But I don't feel like it. So whatever his title was, the Grand Flash Master Dragon, whatever, of the KKK, Mike Pence, the vice presidential candidate, was asked, do you believe that David Duke belongs in the basket of deplorables? And Mike Pence refused to answer that question. And because he didn't answer it, now it's all over everywhere being covered that that Mike Pence won't say that David Duke belongs in a basket of deplorables. Do we see how ridiculous this election has become? Are you going to say that this person belongs in a basket of deplorables? Well, maybe he wants to say that David Duke is someone that no one should ever support, that because of his past and because of his present ideology, he's someone that we should not vote for. I believe it was, what's your boy, Newt Gingrich, who came out and expressly said that. Maybe he wants to say that David Duke is a racist and a homophobe, and he does not have any place in the public discourse. But I'm not going to say that he belongs in the basket of deplorables. But because he will not use Hillary's language, now it's a thing. And it's a really ridiculous thing. But this is how the media works. This is how politics is played. You empower a notion that your opponent cannot support or deny, and you corner them in, and you make a 24-hour news cycle because Mike Pence, in my opinion, is equally as atrocious as David Duke, just on different issues and just publicly on different issues, right? So how can So it's this political game that I no longer have the stomach for. In terms of actually being involved in it with it. But David Duke, of course, David Duke's past is David Duke's past, and he has definitely is a part of that segment of Donald Trump's support base that is racist, that likes Donald Trump because their racism is not condemned. who likes Donald Trump because he flirts with white nationalism. But should a presidential candidate say that he belongs in a basket of deplorables? Well, not if that presidential candidate is so enthralled with political correctness. All right, one last thing I want to cover tonight, and then we'll hit the bonus show. If you want to join the bonus show, go to patreon.com and man, I forgot. I had this great. Go to patreon.com and become a patron for $3 a month or more, whatever you want to donate, and you can become a part of our bonus show family. All right, I want to do a segment called Hypocrisy Now. Hypocrisy Now. And tonight, for most of the night, I've had to talk about so many examples of hypocrisy that comes from the left. And I've made a lot of political enemies over the last year and a half because I have a habit and quite frankly, a knack for quickly seeing hypocrisy. I call it bullshit, but let's be politically correct, right? Hypocrisy. And no one has been, there's so many examples, right? But this most recent incident with Hillary Clinton's health has been one of the best examples of the hypocrisy of the left. And I cannot, I'm sorry, I don't see how, no, I do, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But for me, I cannot hold someone to a standard that I'm not going to hold myself to. I cannot condemn somebody for something that I'm doing. And that's why we're going to do a regular segment called Hypocrisy Now. So Hillary Clinton's health has been called into question a lot over this election, partly because they're not forthcoming with information on her health, and they don't feel it's required for her to disclose these health statements. But it was so ironic in the course of this election, seeing political commentators, particularly the one you see on your screen now, Joan Walsh and Chris Cillizza, who basically have been making the case this entire election that Hillary Clinton's health is not something that we should be discussing. Case in point, if you take a look at your screen, here's a quote from Joan Walsh, who says that she's the best spokesperson for white America, talking about Hillary Clinton's coughing attack and essentially reducing any coverage of her coughing attack to being a right-wing smear. Another example of Joan Walsh's ability to obfuscate the issue is this. Are we seriously talking about Hillary Clinton's health as a serious issue? Really? Well, it's funny, Joan, because the funny thing about it is that Twitter doesn't go away. Neither does your publications for Salon. And as many people have been pointing out, Joan Walsh has in the past been on the front tip of the spear covering the health questions of past presidential candidates, namely, here's a most recent headline, Friday, August 19th, asking about medical mudslinging. The right-wingers reach a new low with their smears about Hillary's health. Well, here's the thing. If we're going to ask about Hillary's health, if we're not going to ask about Hillary's health, then it makes sense that we shouldn't really ask about any of the president's health. But that would be too consistent for Joan Walsh. Here's Joan Walsh in 2008. What's in John McCain's medical records? He'll be releasing everything about his repeated cancer surgeries, but he won't release his psychiatric records, which hold clues to the effect of his Vietnam captivity. But she doesn't stop there. What's wrong with Mitt Romney? His disastrous British visit has to raise question about his capacity for diplomacy required to be president. And highlighted there, you'll see this is a statement from Joan Walsh in 2012. Maybe we should be asking to see his medical records and not just his tax returns. I don't mean to sound flippant about that or insensitive to any kind of problem he may be struggling with, but his struggles are our struggles. He is running to be our president. His struggles are our struggles. He is running to be president. Meanwhile, 4 years later, are we seriously talking about Hillary Clinton's health as a serious issue? Really? Hypocrisy. Now, and it gets worse. So Chris Cillizza, whose name I have a difficult time saying because I always want to say Cizilla, but Chris Cillizza writes for a blog called The Fix on the Washington Post. He too got a piece of the action. Just recently, he stated, "Can we just stop talking about Hillary Clinton's health now?" And this was September 6th. This was just a few days ago, last week. Because it's just something we shouldn't talk about. It's let's lay it to rest. There's really, there's no reason we should be talking about Hillary Clinton's health at this point. But the funny thing about it is, in 2008, he wrote an article about how important it was for us to talk about John McCain's health. And no sooner than he published the article on September 6th saying, "Can we stop talking about Hillary's health now?" he had to write this article, which was laughable. Why I wrote about John McCain's health in 2008. And I don't think we should write about Hillary Clinton's health now. You can't make this up. You cannot make this up. So in 2008, you wrote about John McCain's health. 2016, you don't think we should write about Hillary Clinton's health. Oh, but the news changes really quickly. You got to keep up, Chris. Hillary Clinton's health just became a real issue in the presidential campaign. Published in the Washington Post on September 11th by Chris Cillizza. You know what I found in life? If you don't, how can I put this? If you just stay true to yourself, you don't have to become a contortionist to wiggle your way or weasel your way out of stuff you said before. If you don't lie, you don't have to keep up with your lies. If you don't play political games, you don't have to keep up with your political spin when you turn around and then do the counter spin against your opponent. But that's asking too much, because if you do that, if you hold yourself to the same standard that you demand other people be held to in politics, then you all of a sudden become useless to politicians who need you. I mean, earlier I said I don't understand how they do this, but I understand perfectly well how they do this. This is how politics works. This is how they work it. This is what they want. They want people who in one breath can say, "Don't ask us those kind of questions. How dare you ask us those kind of questions?" And in the next breath say, "We need to ask those same exact questions of our political opponent." They want people who see no problem, no contradiction. They have no qualm with being a political stooge, with being a political propagandist, and forwarding questions and forwarding propositions against their opponent that they will cry foul if you ever did against their candidate of choice. This is what politicians look for. They're not looking for someone who's going to be honest and show integrity, not when it comes to this political game. They want people who are going to twist the truth. Because if you tie your hands to being ethical, and not even just ethical, if you tie your hands to refusing to do something that you have accused another person of doing, if you tie your hands to refusing to use a political opportunity that you lambasted your opponent for using before, if you tie your hands to even being true to yourself, then that paycheck is not for you, because they want and need people who are going to ask questions about Donald Trump's health, but never Hillary Clinton's health. And Donald Trump wants people who are going to ask questions about Hillary Clinton's speeches, but never ask questions about his taxes. That's the way politics works. But that's not the way our media should work. That's not the way our journalists should work. And I've got no problem with politicians doing that, because that's what politicians do. But when they have entire media outlets at their disposal, they are able to not only co-opt their campaign and their constituency, but they're able to co-opt journalists. So then it's not only their political hitmen who are out there doing this, who are asking questions that they would never ask their opponent, that they would never ask their own colleague. They would never ask their politician of choice a certain set of questions. But as soon as their rival gets on, as soon as they get an interview with their political rival, they become this type of journalistic hero of great integrity that's going to ask all of these robust questions that they would never ask their candidate of choice. And that's the ultimate problem I have. Those two people that I showed you tonight who profiles in Hypocrisy Now, they are ostensibly journalists. They're not paid hitmen for the Clinton campaign, political hitmen for the Clinton campaign. They are ostensibly journalists writing for large media outlets, the Washington Post, The Nation. Joan Walsh used to be the editor-in-chief of Salon.com. If this is what our journalism has come to, if this is what our media has devolved into, if this is the standard by which we're going to hold ourselves accountable as journalists, then why even do journalism in the first place? Just go and be a political propagandist for the campaign and get a good check doing it. You know, well, I almost called out some names, but that's enough for tonight, folks. I'll catch you next time. Tomorrow night, we'll be back in the saddle covering some more news. I have another couple of clips that I'm going to do for the after show. So those of you who are patrons, give me about half hour before I drop that after show for you. You'll get the link. You'll get the email. That's all. See you next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is...
Yeah. No, this one. I want this one.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.